Hello, everyone, and welcome to one more insightful session of IIEBM's Induction Program, Batch 21-23. I am Dr. Nidhi Srivastav, Associate Professor at IIEBM, your host for the session. Our today's guest is Mr. Jupiter Kalra, Head of Sales, Electrified Powertrain India. Before introducing the guest, let me brief you about the flow of the session. This session will be of 1 hour, 15 minutes, where first 1 hour will be knowledge sharing and 15 minutes will be question and answer. You can type your question in the chat box that will be addressed towards the end of the session. So let me welcome our guest for today's session, Mr. Jupiter Kalra, and he will share his views on emerging future trends in automobile industry. He started his career with A to Z Maintenance and Engineering Services Limited as management trainee in 2009, where he facilitated IPO, rollout, drafting, and filing DRHP with Securities and Exchange Commission, and thereby successful listing on exchanges in collaboration with external consultants Ernst & Young. He then moved to Krishnamurthy Group as business analyst, where his major roles were to assist vice chairman of group for new product market entry, merger and acquisitions, due diligence, corporate restructuring, benchmarking, financial and operational reviews across 5 business units product lines. Presently, he is holding multiple positions and wearing hats at Mahle. He is heading sales and application engineering, mechatronics, along with handling sales, planning and controlling for Asian countries, and also heads global sales offshoring center at Mahle. He stepped ladders of success there since more than 12 years now. He is driving Mahale's Indian revenue growth by establishing, localizing, and scaling electrified powertrain requirements for the OEMs in India. He is also responsible for demand planning, tracking markets and competitors, thus building customer and product strategies based on existing and target market shares. Having lived and worked in Japan, Germany, and India, he possesses a global mindset and enjoy an international atmosphere. So without taking much time, let us start this session. Over to you, Mr. Kalra.
Hello everyone, hello students. I'm pleased to be here in front of you to give you some guidance on what exactly the industry is doing, how is the industry shifting, and maybe some insight which could help you in shape your future in the right direction. Without wasting a lot of time, I would go directly into the slides. I would ask the professors to please share the slides so that I can start the session. Thank you very much. So in today's session, as I briefed already, that we will be talking about the future and the emerging trends in the automotive industry, or you can say manufacturing industry as well, because both of them go hand in hand.
Sir, your voice is coming very low. If you can just check the mic settings.
Just a second.
Now it is good. Now it was
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is that better now?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Perfect. So the flow today, if you move to the next slide, the flow today would be, I would brief you about the history of the automotive industry. Also in the Indian automotive industry, how did that started, how the OEMs came in, so that you have a brief background about the automotive industry. We would then move to the numbers part to see how big the global automotive industry is and how big the Indian automotive industry is. Once you familiarize about the size of the markets globally, India and also other regions, we will then see the temporary shift, a temporary blip that happened in the market due to the global pandemic in the automotive industry, and forecasting some things which might happen in the next weeks or months or quarters as a learning from 2008 Lehman crisis that we had. After that, even because of a temporary blip, we still feel that India would still be a major hub for the global automotive industry. And why do we feel so? We'll brief you about that. Last but not the least would be the major topic for today, which will talk about the shifts in the automotive industry and some inputs to you so that how we can be ready for all these shifts which is happening in the industry now, but will also keep on happening in the next years or decades, and how you guys can be ready for that. I would be presenting a slide in the end as a conclusion or a summary for the whole session. I will now move to the next slide, which is the history of the automotive industry. Next slide, please. Right. And here you would see basically, as we all know, that in the start, it was just a wheel that was invented. Then we had spokes on the wheel, then a motor on the wheel, and then slowly and slowly we had vehicles coming up, bullet cars coming up, and then we continue to advance on various technologies in the automotive per se. But if I talk about the Indian automotive industry, the first car that ran on the Indian roads was in 1897. And about 30 years from then, it was all imported cars that were running. Of course, during the British era, we had all the cars imported, and that too in very small numbers. It was only in 1942, still the British era, when Hindustan Motors was set up, and also 2 years later in 1944 when Premier was set up in India. But at this point in time, both of them were producing the cars for General Motors and Fiat respectively. Having said that, a year later in 1945, we had Tata Motors and Mahindra, both the global giants today, the Indian giants today, set up their shops in 1945, while Tata was manufacturing the locomotives and the Mahindra was assembling the Jeep, the US manufacturer, their utility vehicle in India. After the independence in 1947, we had various government and private companies which started the push towards the automotive industry. In 1954 is the first time when we saw Tata Motors forming a JV, a joint venture with Daimler of Germany to manufacture the commercial vehicles in India. However, since then, until 1980s, it was still Hindustan Motors and Premier. So Hindustan Motors Ambassador and Premier Padmini still dominating the market. These were the two major vehicles in the market. But in 1980s, when liberalization started by the government, there were many new players coming into the market. In the start, it was the government of India themselves collaborating with Suzuki from Japan, forming Maruti Udyog in India, which first rolled out Maruti 800 then in 1983. Subsequently, in 1988 is first when Tata Motors forayed into the manufacturing of passenger vehicles. Until now, they were just manufacturing commercial vehicles. And after that, it all started with almost all the global companies entering into the Indian market, either independently, for example, Hyundai, or through a joint venture, example, Ford, that came through a joint venture with Mahindra. And today, as we stand, the two Indian auto giants, Tata and Mahindra, which was set up in 1945, acquired the global companies. For example, Tata Motors acquired Jaguar Land Rover from UK, a huge luxury car manufacturer. And at the same time, Mahindra also acquired a Korean company called as SsangYong. These two names are now well-known, renowned in the automotive industry globally. Today, almost all the global players are present in India, and almost everyone is exporting the vehicles from India. I would now take you to the next slide, which would then give you some numbers about the global and the Indian automotive industry. So in 2000, ma'am, would it be possible for you to put in the presentation mode and not a PDF, because this slide has some animations?
Sir, animations will not be visible in this platform.
All right. So I just brief you on this. On 2006, when we see India on the global automotive landscape, it was missing in the top 10 markets. We were not there. We were very small until then. But 12 years down, 2018, as we speak, we were already number 5 in the global automotive scenario. Even today, when we when we speak, we have already surpassed Germany to be the fourth largest manufacturer, but because of COVID, we are still flipping between number four and number five. Going forward, I can easily see with the growth percentage very low in Germany, while very high in India, we'll soon surpass Germany and be a number four manufacturer in few years down the line. While it will take about one and a half decade for us to be number three, because the growth again in Japan is declining trend and we are on a increasing trend. But I think that's far. The message here is that India has strongly made their presence in the global automotive landscape. I would take you to the next slide, which then talks about 2018, which was the best year for the Indian automotive market. So as of 2018 and even today, uh, India is the world's largest two and three wheeler manufacturer globally. We produce around 25 million two wheelers globally and also a million three wheelers globally. Also on the tractor front, close to a million, and we are still the world largest tractor manufacturer globally. If we talk about the medium and heavy duty, the trucks and the buses segment, we are the second largest globally and the fifth largest passenger car producer globally. If we talk about light commercial vehicles, which is in the cargo segment, let's say Tata Ace, Mahindra Maximo, and so on, we are the sixth largest manufacturer of the light commercial vehicles globally. I would now, since you have a brief about the global and the Indian automotive industry in numbers per se, and you know where India stands, where are we, how big we are, in which segments we are number one, two, and five, I would take you to the next slides, which talk about the COVID impact of on the automotive industry, and of course the learnings from 2008 crisis. Now, you see all these dots in red, which basically talks about that only in 2020, because of COVID, each region lost a significant amount of volumes. Now, if I talk about North America, you see on the left top, minus 3.9 million vehicles, which is about 23% of their total production. So only in 2020, North America lost 23% of the total production. On the right side, you see a lot of other bubbles. Basically, the darker the bubble, the significant the impact is, and the larger the bubble, you also see the huge impact. So you see the darkest of all these is South America, India, and rest of Asia, also Europe, where we have lost more than 25%. So 28% in Europe and close to 35% in India, South America. We lost huge numbers because of COVID. If I talk about total as a world, summing up all what you see in the screen, we lost about 22 million vehicles globally, which is roughly one fourth of the total production. We are close to 90 million global production. So we lost one fourth of the market, which is a huge blow. But this was all regions that suffered this production loss, and it will take us few years globally as an automotive industry to come back. Now, why India is better placed compared to others, I will come on the next slides. But before that, I will show you also on the next slides what has been the impact of COVID. As we all know that we had lockdowns, we had economic contractions, we had demand slowdown, and we had liquidity crisis. So because of lockdowns, we could not sell, the dealerships were closed, you guys could not go to the market to buy the cars. So there was significant loss. Economic contractions, there was the GDP growth was not happening because again everything was shut and the economy itself was completely closed. So we definitely had economic contractions globally. Demand slowdown, again a lot of people lost jobs. There was a huge salary cuts. People were not able to pay their EMIs, rents, and so on. And that was the priority. Getting a car was kind of a luxury, not a necessity, I would say. And that is where the demand had to be slowed down. Liquidity crisis. Not just individuals, but even if we talk about the big dealerships, the auto component manufacturers, or even the OEMs, they were not able to produce, they were not able to sell, and hence the revenue was not coming, which basically led into a liquidity crisis. They also have huge borrowings from the bank, which they were not able to repay, and that led to the liquidity crisis. Now, on the next slide, I would show you basically the few scenarios that we have built up to see when the economy is reviving. So, in scenario one, which is a bit of an optimistic scenario, or let's say realistic scenario, where we feel the economic recovery would happen in 3 to 4 quarters, while in scenario two, which is a bit of a pessimistic, maybe having more after effects, we feel that the economy would revive in 4 to 5 quarters. Now, you would see that there is about 1 to 2 quarters gap between economic recovery and the auto industry recovery. It's because when the economy recovers, people start getting into a spending mode, and it takes 1.5 quarters for them to the market to reflect, for the cars to be booked, for cars to be sold, produced, and that's where you see, as an automotive industry, we still feel it will take about 5 to 6 quarters for us to fully recover, which basically is 1.5 year. Let's say it'll take us to recover back to the numbers where we were. Next slide talks about some learnings from 2008 financial crisis. Now, as we know, during the Lehman crisis in 2008, the same situation we had. Of course, it was not a pandemic, but the situation of the companies were more or less same. So what we witnessed after 2008 was that there was substantial increase in the mergers and acquisitions that happened in that era. It's because, a lot of companies uh, get low on reserves, they can't produce, they can't sell, and they're not able to furnish the loans that they have taken, which basically leads the bigger companies to acquire these small companies who have cash reserves and surplus. So it's an important point that we always, any company or an individual who has a substantial reserve is able to survive in these circumstances which are unknown, that can happen anytime in the industry. We are expecting almost similar trend in the next quarters or years, where we feel that even if the recovery will happen, there are still small players which will not be able to fully revive, and there will be big players who will then acquire these small companies. We already have seen various announcements, for example, recently from Motherson Sumi, another tier one, global tier one, an Indian but supplies globally. They have announced that they will use this situation to acquire more companies. This is a company which is cash surplus, Maruti as well. And these are the companies during this time they look for opportunities. Any smaller company which is in a need of cash, they buy these companies and use it for the future, because right now the valuations are pretty attractive. So we can see probably in the next quarters a lot of consolidations happening, not just in auto component, but maybe at a OEM level, the manufacturer level also. Now, next slide talks about 6 trends that we are expecting after the COVID-19 pandemic is over. First and foremost is capital infusion, which basically I talked about, that companies have less of cash. So basically, let's say if the manufacturers who are producing cars, they actually need all the components. And if a smaller component who is producing a small component is not able to make its needs because of the cash crunch, then these companies will acquire the smaller companies and infuse more capital. The capital infusion can also be done by the promoters itself if they have other businesses or cash lying elsewhere, or it can also happen through banks. A typical example here is when government rolled out the schemes that the MSMEs, the medium and small enterprises, can get loans at much cheaper rates. This is an initiative by the government to infuse capital, which we have already noticed. The second one is OEMs to drive consolidation in the tier one market. Like I just mentioned, the manufacturers, which are the OEMs, will actually acquire some of the tier ones, the smaller companies, because if they don't acquire this, then even if one of the component is not being produced, the end line, the car, will not be produced. So they need to take care of the whole supply chain circle. Third is opportunity for the global companies to de-risk the supply base. So this is where the supply chain comes into the picture, since we are procuring parts globally, and this is the opportunity for the big companies to use the supply chain globally. Since they have a huge purchasing power, they source components globally, and then this helps them in getting at a good prices. Fourth is shifting in the sourcing base from large distributors to India. For example, a classic example here is Make in India. Due to pandemic, some countries were closed. Let's say now India is open, but maybe some smaller countries like Indonesia and all are still closed. And in case a key component is coming from that country, for example, Indonesia, we still can't get it because that country is closed, or vice versa if India is closed. And that is where we will see the localized approach coming up, Make in India approach coming up, and local procurement and manufacturing of components will be the key. Increasing focus on the aftermarket. I think you all must have noticed that during the lockdown, when your cars or two-wheelers were not getting started, you had to go back to the market to change the spark plugs or change the batteries and then get these vehicles started. So this will lead to a increased demand in the aftermarket segment, and new business models are likely to surface. For example, we already are seeing the huge demands of good quality filters in the car, which improves the quality of the air. There are trends happening. For example, you increase the oxygen level in the car. So there are new business models also coming into the market. Next slide. I would also then show you some recent changes or push that are coming from the government and the OEMs. So from government side, we have seen some regulation changes that are coming. For example, emission norms are recently changed, crash norms, safety norms, road safety. For example, every two-wheeler now needs to be equipped with an ABS, and some cafe norms. So there are various norms that are getting changed, which basically leads the vehicles in India to be more safe, to be more global standards. It helps in preventing the roads accident, but it also helps the OEM to export more to the larger countries. Scrappage scheme is another initiative by the government, an interesting one, which will basically lead to all the older vehicles needs to be scrapped. So now there is a policy from the government which says that all the vehicles which are 15 years old, so even if you have a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler which is more than 15 years, you need to scrap that, which means you need to go to a scrapping center which are now getting set up, and you need to give your vehicle back over there. They will scrap your whole vehicle, of course give you some money in return, or when you buy a new two-wheeler or four-wheeler, you will get some percentage discounts on that. This policy will come into phases from 2022. Only the public sector companies or the government companies will be eligible for that. In 23, then there's the commercial vehicles, the bigger trucks that are plying on the road, which is creating a lot of pollution. And 24 onwards, it will be the passenger cars, the regular people that what we are driving, we will be forced to change the vehicles. It is mainly done so that the pollution goes less in the market. On the right side, you see structural policies, as I talked about, Make in India, and some quality guidelines, so restriction on imports and so on, which is coming up. Again, a trend which is done by the initiative by the government and the OEMs, and also intra automotive, like I talked about, some consolidation happening of the big OEMs. For example, Harley now, like GM is now exited out of India. Ford is also partially exited, but hopefully will completely exit. And Harley as well now, Harley's distribution and the sales network is now with Hero MotoCorp. So all these things are bound to happen. When you have less of cash, you then prioritize the markets, or you still be in the market with the help of a local player. And these are all the changes that we are seeing in the market. Now that's the push from the government. On the next slide, I will also show you some new vehicle launches. So from all the OEMs, now at this point in time, to generate more demand, they basically launched more vehicles, new cars, facelifted models with new engine or some new features coming up, so that there's a demand gets generated back in the market. Here is list of all the vehicles that are being launched by all the OEMs in 21 or 2022 or 23. I would go to the next slide, and having understand why Next slide, please. Right. Thank you. So having understood that where India stands in the automotive landscape, and also there was a temporary blip, lower numbers in 2020 because of COVID, why do we still feel that India will remain as a major hub for the global automotive industry? When I say global automotive industry, I mean to say why will we still be relevant and why we can still export out of India and be there for the global industry. I'll show that in the next slides. Right. So on the right side, extreme right, you would see some facts about the Indian automotive industry. The auto industry contributes about 7% of the total India GDP, which is a huge number. If we talk about only manufacturing, automotive industry contributes around 49% of the total manufacturing and employs about 3.5 crore people, 35 million jobs. Now, since the government has a target of making India a 5 trillion USD economy from 2.5 now, it can only happen if you take all the sectors. And automotive, as you see, is about 7% of the total GDP. The industry needs to survive for India to flourish overall. And that's where there are targets for the automotive industry to contribute 12% to the whole GDP, and also to add around 6.5 crore more jobs in the decade. Now, I think this is what is important for you guys, for those who want to, who aspire to be in the automotive industry or the manufacturing sector. Out of this 6.5 crores, it's going to be into which fields? Are you prepared for that? Are you going in the right direction? So we will speak about all these things after a few slides, which would be, I'm very sure, interesting for you guys. Let's move to the next slide, which would also give you some macroeconomic indicators. So GDP per se, India has been fantastic. Even in the last quarters, we see there is a temporary slowdown of the GDP, but it's still the fastest compared to any other economy in the world. And also compared to the average of the world, we are the fastest growing GDP. Interest rates, we have seen all-time low. The trend is declining, and that basically helps the consumers to take loans at a lower interest rate and go ahead to buy the vehicles. Ease of doing business on the right side is a very interesting KPI, which we have seen improved quite a lot in the last 7 to 8 years. So this is a index which the companies who manufacture or even service industry who are available in India, they basically rate India on the how easy it is to do business in India compared to the global countries. Now, these companies who are available globally, they have a global experience, and as you can see, that India's ranking has almost halved. So it's in the terms of going better, we are almost double better now. We were about 130 rankings in 2012, 14, and even 16. But now, after Modi government coming in, we have put a lot of initiatives. The government has taken a lot of initiatives, like having implementing GST, which is then a standard tax, demonetization, and various new laws coming up, which helps these companies, reducing the corporate tax, for example. This helps the global companies to do the business easily, and that improves the scale of India on a global parameter. On the next slide, also I would take you to see how will India really par in terms of numbers. Now, this is the next 3 slides would be an interesting graph for you to see. On the left side, we see 2017, where the total industry global volumes was 99 million. And on the right side is 2024, which is about 111 million or 11 crores. Now, there is a line in between, which is a world map on the top. And I have classified on the left side all the advanced or the developed economies, and on the right side all the developing economies. So you see, from 2017 to 2024, we have about 12.5 million new vehicles that will be coming on the market, new vehicles sold on the market. Out of this, if you see on the left side, a total of all these, it's only 500,000, which is contributing to this 12.5. And on the right side, if you see, the developed economies are more or less giving about 11.9 million volumes. So the majority of the growth in the next 4 or 5 years is coming from the developing economies. Even if you see in the details of the developing economies, we see after China, second is India, which is contributing to 2.3 million volumes, which means there is a huge growth that we see in India is coming up. Now, this is on the vehicle front. On the next slide, if I go to the engine front, the ICE is internal combustion engine. Now we have, heard a lot that market is moving towards electrification and engines will no more be there. You need to buy an electric vehicle. While that's true, but I think in India it's going to take a lot of time, especially if I talk about cars and trucks and so on. Sure, for two and three wheelers, I think it's going to be a bit early. But again, the same scenario coming up. If we look at the engine production from 98 million on the left to 104 million on the right side, we see about 7 million more engines coming up. And again, India and China are almost at par of 3 million every year, which means the electrification will happen much faster pace in the developed economies like US, Canada, Japan, and South Korea. You see it's negative, which means less number of engines will be coming in the market, but more of electric vehicles will be coming in these developed economies. While on the right side, on the developing economies, we still have a few years before we switch to e-mobility, and we will still have engines. So all the mechanical engineers and all the industry, nothing needs to be worried because if we have small numbers in other countries, economies of scale per se, it does not make sense to manufacture those small numbers in those countries. While India, China, and other smaller countries where electrification will come much later, better to produce for the local demand and also for export. So it's going to be an interesting stage in the next few years for Indian market. While on the next slide, if I show you from the EV per se, electric vehicle per se, the story is a bit different. On the left side, the developed economies are contributing majority, 3.8 million, where Europe, US, Japan are more electrified, getting more electrified and bringing more EVs. While on the right side, China is still contributing a good amount to the EV, but India is a very small number. So I don't see until 24, 25 a good amount converting to EVs. No, there will still be small number of vehicles available in the market, but we will still be more ICE dominated. Having said that, in the next slide, I would summarize this as why India is a future growth destination. Various reasons, as I mentioned, the highest GDP in the world. The ease of doing business index is going up for India. It's in green. We have a low car penetration. This is an interesting concept again. Now, when we say low car penetration and 25 per thousand, that means for every 1,000 people in India, we only have 25 cars. While if I talk about the developed economies like US, Europe, even Japan, the number is close to 500, 600 per 1,000 people, which means we have a huge headroom available from 25 to maybe 400, 500 or whatever the market can absorb, which means the growth per se, we have a huge headroom available, and I think we will be growing to that number. While the developed economies, if they're already 500, 600, the headroom available is very less over there. We also have a demographic advantage. The population is huge, but at the same time, the young population from 25 to 38 bracket is also a very high percentage. And these are the people who have high aspirations. These are the people who enter into a job, take a loan, high aspirations. They get a good model in the market. They want to buy a new car with the latest variant. And that's where the demographic advantage helps India. New expectations, which means the regulation side, as I just touched about in the last slides, this also helps the industry in exporting because we then get close to the European and the the advanced economies, and this helps us in exporting it to other countries. Now, this is the last segment, which I would really like to spend a bit more time for you. And I have classified this shifts in the automotive industry and how to be ready basically into 5 categories. On the first category, I will talk about what all changes are happening in the market. The second talks about how, as an organization, like the companies who are in the market and also workforce, the talent, of the future, how do you have to be ready and how will it look like? Having said that, the third point is what are the skills and the capabilities that will be required in the automotive industry so that you guys can learn that. And fourth is how do we bridge the skills, knowing that what is needed, still how do we build that capability gap and the right development in the whole ecosystem? How do we do that? I'll talk about that. And the last but not the least is what is the role of we as business leaders, HR, and also the institutions in making organization or making you guys ready for the future. I'll then go to the next slide, which will then talk about all the changes that are happening in the automotive industry these days. So these are few words that you hear a lot in the market, connected vehicles, like we have seen Morris Garage, MG coming up with Hector, connected vehicle, internet inside, or electrification, or scrappage policy, shared mobility, yearly update, localization. All these things are happening in the market. Maybe I'll just touch upon few things. Electrification, I think already. Shared mobility, when we say that people will be using more of the shared vehicles like Ola, Uber, and so on. In other countries is very famous already, going from point A to point B. You don't have to take your car. A scrappage policy I also briefed. Lightweight, if you see just below connected, it means the cars, to improve the fuel efficiency, we need to reduce the weight of the car, so all the components are going lightweighting so as to improve the efficiency of the car. Make in India on the right side. Online sales, we saw in pandemic, you can't go to the showroom to buy a car, you can then have an online sales. Virtual reality, vehicle platooning, as you see just below Make in India, is another interesting concept. For example, if you have a logistics provider and if you have to have two trucks going from Mumbai to Delhi, one after the other, both the trucks are going, do you necessarily need to have two drivers? Maybe one truck can follow the second truck. So with vehicle platooning, what will happen is the second vehicle, through advanced sensors, will be able to detect the front truck. As soon as the front truck will apply a brake, the brakes will automatically get applied in the second vehicle. If it increases the speed, the second vehicle will also increase the speed. It's basically, platooning means the second vehicle will just follow the first vehicle. Automated, sustainability, and artificial intelligence all coming into the market. Now, if I go to the next slide, basically, I will just summarize all of this into a few names. In the bottom, you would see the two names in black color, Case and Easy on the right side. And I have just underlined all the key things which is being talked about on a daily basis. Case, we say it's connected, it's automated, shared, and electric. These are the four trends that are coming in the market. On the right side, there's another name to the same thing. It's Easy. So we say electrified, automated, shared, connected, and yearly updated. Now, yearly updated is something new. For example, you have your iPhones or Android phones which have a iOS or a software which gets updated over the air every year. When a new software comes in, it automatically updates. Similarly, in the cars, when they are connected, the software, the maps, and the complete interface can be changed over the air. You don't need to go to the showrooms. And this is what will be yearly updated. This is what will drive the further interest in the market in the next years. Having said what changes are happening, on the next slide, I will show you what organization and workforce need to do. So basically, the organizations needs to have a structural agility. We need to be flexible. We need to be analytics driven, which means whatever the numbers are throwing, we need to have work more digital, going into that digital per se, what data analytics are throwing up. We need to have the decision making based on what numbers throw rather than what we think. Third is appointing custodians to build and manage the organizations of the future, because we in the industry are more of mechanical engineers, we are more manufacturing side. But if we see the trend is moving towards digital, we need people from outside, from the new sectors, so that they can come and be the custodians and tell us what can we do in these things. Building an agile workforce and a workforce that's flexible. For example, I know a lot of friends of mine who were mechanical engineers but now taking experience into EVs, electric vehicles, and getting trained into that areas as well. So you need to be agile and flexible because the changes would come in the market and you need to update yourself. Widening the talent catchment, we just don't need, as an organization, we don't need to go to only the mechanical engineers, but need to go to the software engineers, need to go to the MBA side, so that from a management perspective also we can have different people in the industry and help us steer through these difficult times. And rebalancing the workforce, as I said, it's not about only a particular sector, but we need to rebalance the workforce through various sectors and deployment plans. Next slide, I would talk about the various skills that are needed and the capabilities that are needed in the industry. Now, the Automotive Mission Plan, AMP as we call, they say that we need to have about 6.5 crore jobs in the market in this industry in next 10 years, 1 decade. Which areas would it be? It would be mechatronics, it would be artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, data mining, lean manufacturing, 3D modeling, and machine handling skills. So when we, and often I get a question that if we are more moving towards robots, towards machine, will the human interface not needed? No. In fact, it will be needed much more. We need to have machine handling skills. There are various things that are still needed, so there's nothing to worry about. In fact, we need to just upskill ourselves, train ourselves into those areas. Second is building functional capability. So as managers, as leaders, we need to have a high emotional intelligence and also a capability for innovation. Something that's changing in the market, we also innovate and change it. We need to wear multi-hat talent. We just don't need to be into one segment, but we have to manage various segments at one go, various teams at one go, because you never know how the market is reacting. Unless and until you're wearing multi-hat, it's difficult to be surviving in the market these days. Promoting lifelong learning, again, it's like reskilling, reskilling yourself, see what's happening around in the market, and learn new courses, learn new ways of learning, and keep on updating yourself. Revisiting the corporate training programs, this is for the industry. We need to revisit the programs. For example, even for the current technicians and the engineers, we need to train them on other areas into e-mobility, artificial intelligence, so that the current workforce also gets advanced into new skills. Next slide. Now, when we know which skills are these, we need to understand how do we bridge these skills. What is the capability gap, and what is the right development ecosystem for that? So I always say there is a 3E model for that: enrichment, enablement, and enhancement. And enrichment will always happen at an individual level. You need to keep on enriching yourself with the new things coming in the market. Enhancement happens at an organizational level. So the organization, when they keep on enhancing the portfolio, keep on investing, they also need to enhance the employee skills, keep on giving more trainings. And enablement happens at an ecosystem level. There are various industrial bodies available for that. For example, SIAM, it's Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. We have ACMA, we have FADA. There are various industry-wide organizations which have contacts with the government, with institutions, which basically bridge this gap and enable the skills, the workforce. There are various training centers as well, keep on making a regulatory framework and guiding people through various skills to enable them to build a new ecosystem. So the 3E approach is going to be very important. Next slide would be when we know all these, what changes are happening, what skills do we need, how to bridge that. Now the last is we need to walk the talk. We need to have a call to this action. How do we do that? As a role for the business leaders, and we as HRs, and we as institutions as well, we need to be making the talent, you guys, the organization, future ready. We can do this by creating initial pilot projects, which means taking a small pool of people, training them in a different area, and then multiplying that into different, more people. Second is to communicate. We need to have a communicate strategy for the organization. I think the business school of yours is doing a fantastic job in calling people from various industries and communicating and over communicating to tell you guys what is going to be the changes that are happening in the market. So we need to map these and communicate which is the right thing happening at your business school. We need to initiate the reskilling, which means even with the industries, we need to reskill the people who are right now in a different domain. We need to train them on different areas so that they can still be at par with the changes happening in the market. We need to get the people experience right, which means we need to hire people from different backgrounds so that the whole we have a blend of people in the industry, and that helps us from various angles. And inculcating trust through transparency. Organizations can't go without having trust in the teams, in everyone, and of course in leaders. So this concept of trust through transparency needs to be done more, which we all as business leaders and the HRs need to do. Last slide from me. As we have, I think we have gone through a lot of slides, but I would still like to summarize all these points into the 6 points as you see it on the screen as a conclusion slide. As first is auto industry. We need to understand we have a strong history. We have a huge headroom available, and the fundamentals of the industry are intact. So nothing to worry about. The auto industry has a great future in the coming decades. Second is to prepare yourself. Industry is good, but as long as we are not prepared, nothing can happen. So we need to be agile. We need to be flexible, constantly learning, and just evolve for the betterment of ourselves, for the industry, and for the whole ecosystem. Third is keep investing. So the automotive companies have to increase their research and development spend to cater to the changing needs. So let's say I give you an example of a company which manufacture engines. Now with the e-mobility coming in, as Male, if I talk about my company where I come from, since last 8 years, we have been investing heavily in the e-mobility, acquiring companies, making a lot of R&D expenditure so that we can be future ready. This is what all the companies needs to do. Right skilling, the fourth one, is imperative for the leaders, industry, and institution to prepare you guys, because you are the future of the industry, to prepare you guys in the right direction. Fifth is collaboration at all the levels. I mean, gone are those days when a particular organization can survive alone. Now the times are challenging, times are tough. At an individual level, organizational, national, or even at global level, we need to collaborate. We all need to collaborate for the betterment of all of us. And last but not the least, believe in yourself, keep learning, keep moving, and best of luck to all of you. With this, I close my session, and I am open to any questions or any further things that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful session that we had. I do have a couple of questions, if you permit. I may
Sure,
ask.
please.
So the first question is, what is your suggestion to PGDM students if they want their career in automotive sector specifically?
I think that's a...
Like, yeah, we have discussed about skilling, but we have discussed in general. So if I talk specifically about these kids, they are from PGDM. They have marketing, HR, finance as their specializations. So if you can suggest.
Sure. So I think there is not a common recipe for everyone. It has to be an individual recipe, because as the students here are doing PGDM, but the background, someone is coming from accounting background, someone is coming from an economics background, or someone is coming from an engineering background. So it has to be a different recipe for everyone. But all I can say is that there are scope in almost every field. If we talk about marketing, it's more of online sales, online selling of the products these days. If we talk about HR, again, you have to be agile to understand what the industry needs. How you can get the right talent, not just from the manufacturing industry. So I think it's a very I can't have a single recipe, but if you can skill yourself more into data analytics, more of online virtual sales, I think it's going to be a huge step forward for the industry.
Right. The next question is, you have talked a lot about electric vehicles. So do you think that we have sufficient technology, infrastructure, and all these supportive things to adapt for, mobilization of electric vehicles in India?
Right. I think it's a very valid question. It's something that is being talked about at almost on a daily basis. Now, India, if we talk about, we have the biggest two and three wheeler manufacturers in India. So I personally feel that the electrification step at first is going to be for two wheelers and three wheelers at a very rapid pace. But next step, I think late would be for the cars. But for heavy industry, I think electrification is not the solution because you need to charge your vehicles. And if the trucks are going on the highways, you can't just stop and charge. Infrastructure per se, I think there are various steps by being taken by the government, national, state, and even the companies to set up the charging station. Won't be a problem. India is a power surplus country from that per se. The only problem we will have is the battery wise lithium. India does not have a huge amount of reserves for lithium, and we need to depend on importing a lot of raw material. It does not make sense that you reduce your import on fuel, but increase your imports on lithium. So there's a lot of research happening on replacing lithium with different. As long as we can come up with that, I think electrification has a huge future in India.
All right. The next question is asked by one of these students. She's saying that everyone focuses on the work, field, skills, etc. But if you can suggest few measures with which they can deal with emotional intelligence and can sustain in the initial days of corporate functioning.
Right. I think my conclusion slide talks about believe in yourself. From my perspective, I think this is the best recipe. Although for EQ, there are various courses also available, which you can even do yourself online, or when you enter the industry, you can specifically ask for this. But I think dealing with, as long as you are confident in yourself, you have the right skills and you're placed right at a corporate stage, once you enter, you will have a smooth journey for that.
So last question. What kept you motivated throughout your journey, and since you are in automotive industry since a long way now, so what kept you motivated?
I think various factors. First and foremost, I love automobiles. I have a passion for automobiles since my childhood days, and that's the reason I have been into this field. Secondly, what also motivates me is to not just learn, but to pass it back to the students, to industry, and that's what has also kept me imbibed, that I keep on learning because I can then give it back to the industry like I'm doing today. So this is something, the passion and to give it back to the society is something that has kept me motivated always.
Well, thank you so much for your time and knowledge that you have shared with students. And I'm sure students had great learning. They would now Google a lot on careers in automobile sector, in automotive industry as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.